Hello and welcome. I'm Duncan Watt. I teach here at Mohawk College, and I'm doing a video today to teach you guys how to hang a door. My hope is you'll view this at home and learn all the intricacies on hanging a door. Anything you don't understand, you can rewind and watch again until you do understand it. This should help you in the shop in putting the door together. I've been teaching here for about 12 years now. Started in '08, and I've been a carpenter since 1979. So I've got lots of experience hanging doors. So hopefully I can teach you a thing or two, and let's get started. Hey class, first thing I'd like to talk about is the rough stud opening, or RSO for short. It's important, I think, before you even start hanging a door, is just to check your rough stud opening, make sure it's correct. For the width, I like to talk about the width first. So I know there's a bit of a glare on the whiteboard, but I'll take a picture of that. We're dealing with a door of 24 inches wide, and we have two sets of jambs at 3/4 of an inch each, which equals 1.5 inches. And then I like 3/8 of an inch on each side of the jamb for shimming, so that's additional 3/4 of an inch. So I like to see my rough stud opening for a 2-foot door at 26 1/4 inches wide. So I always add, when I'm framing, 2 1/4 inches to the size of the door to allow enough room to get the door in and to shim it. Okay, moving on to the door height. The door height, we've got a height of door of 80 inches. We need 3/4 inch for a finished floor, whether it be hardwood or tile. Best always to budget 3/4 inch for the finished floor. And the gap between the door and the finished floor should be 3/4 inch, just to clear any carpets or to allow for airflow for HVAC systems. Our head jamb is going to be 3/4 inch thick. Then we've got a gap between the door and the head jamb of 1/8 inch. And then at the very top, I want to have 3/8 for shimming as well. So my total RSO for my height should be 82 3/4. And anytime I'm framing, I always cut my jack studs 81 1/4, and that'll get me my 82 3/4. Okay, from there, let's take those measurements over to our opening, and we'll just double check the sizes to make sure it's going to fit. Anytime I have an existing door opening and the floor is already put in, I always check the base as well to see if the floor is level, because I might have to adjust my jambs a little bit for the floors being out of level. All right, let's go check our rough stud opening. Okay, here we're at the door opening that I'm going to hang my door in today. So what I want to check is my rough stud opening to make sure what I'm building is actually going to fit. So I was looking for 26 1/4. And I see I got 26 5/16 at the top. I have 26 1/4 at the bottom, so width-wise I'm okay. I'll just check my height. We're going to pretend that this 2x4 is the finished floor. So looking for 82 1/4. I have 82, so I know my height is going to be okay too. So we're okay on our rough stud opening. Next thing I'm going to check, I'm going to just check to see if the wall is fairly plumb. Actually looks pretty good. And I'll check my opening to make sure it's plumb, and it looks pretty good as well. And since my finished floor, the 2x4, is acting as my finished floor, I'm just going to check to see if that's level as well. My finished floor is a little low on the left-hand side, so I'll keep an eye on that as I'm doing my door. If it was off a lot, like 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, I would have to cut my jambs at different heights to make up for that. I'd put the one jamb in, the 3/4 inch gap one, and I'd raise the other side to make the top level. All right, the last thing I want to check are the width of my jambs. So I'm going to check it from drywall to drywall, in this case plywood to plywood. At the top here I have 4 3/8. At the bottom here 4 3/8. And this top 4 3/8. So I'm going to cut my jambs 4.5 inches. I'm going to cut it 1/8 of an inch wider, so the jambs will hang past the drywall or the wall, a 1/16 on each side. And what that does for me is guarantee that the back of the casing will be tight to the door jamb. I'm also going to cut my door jambs on 3 degrees and make the long point facing in, the short point will be on the back side, again guaranteeing me that the back of my casing will be tight against the door jamb. All right, let's go ahead and start cutting our door jambs. All right, let's get ready to start cutting our door jambs. The material we're going to use today is 4/4 stock pine by 12 inches wide by 16 feet long. With this kind of material, I can get 2 sets of doors out of one piece of material here. So I'm going to roughly cut these to length at 83 inches for my side jambs. That's going to give me an extra inch, inch and a half to play with. And I'll cut the head jamb at 2'1", giving me a couple extra inches. So let's go ahead and do that. Always safety first, so I had to run away and get my safety glasses. We're good to go now. After I've cut my jambs roughly to length, next thing I need to do is start milling it down. I do have a little bit of a problem with the board I've selected. It's got quite a cup to it. Hopefully this shows up on video, but I've got probably about a 5/16 dip in the center. So the way I'm going to tackle this, I'm going to make sure my edge is straight first. I'm going to go to the table saw and I'm going to rip it down to approximately 5 inches. And by that, it'll flatten down a little bit. I won't need to take as much off with the thickness planer. Okay, I'm here at the ripping table. I've got the table saw already set up at 6 inches. Now this is still rough sawn, so if you're to look down that, you can see that it's fairly straight, that edge. That edge needs to be straight because it's following the fence on the table saw. You'll get into a little bit of trouble if that's crooked. So if your edge is crooked, go to the jointer and straighten out that edge before you come to the table saw. I don't need to do that here because my edge is fairly straight. So let's go ahead and rip this in half. Now you remember after the radial arm saw, I took the framing square, and I laid the framing square across that 2x12, that 1x12, sorry, and at a 5/16 gap. By ripping the board in half down to 6 inches, I basically have eliminated that gap. So my board is much truer. I won't be taking as much material off when I go to the thickness planer. That's where we're headed to next. We're gonna head to the thickness planer, knock the sides and the head jamb down to 3/4 inch. Okay, here we are at the thickness planer. So just to recap, I've got 1 inch thick boards, 7 feet long, and one at 2'1" long. I need to knock that down to 3/4 inch. So I'm going to use the thickness planer to do that. Typically what we've taught here at Mohawk College, when the boards, usually we go to the joiner first to get one good face and one good edge. I already have one good edge. I checked that by using my eye. And second of all, since these boards are so long, they're very difficult to run through the joiner. And my boards are fairly straight, so I'm going to go right to the thickness planer and do both faces with the thickness planer. Hang on while we'll turn the dust collector on. boards to 3/4 of an inch. Next thing we need to do is rip it to the correct width. And if you remember, our door opening was 4 1/4, so we need to go 4 3/8 from long point to long point. So let's head on back to the table saw and we'll rip these to width. Okay, to set this table saw up for cutting the jambs, we want to cut our angle on 3 degrees. Again, I want the long point facing in towards the door, and I want the edge of the jamb cut back at 3 degrees. So what I'm going to do is just going to raise the blade up. Make sure your power's off. Raise your blade up. And I'll set this over at 3 degrees. There, my miter's reading 3 degrees. I want to double check that. So what I've done is taken just a scrap block of wood. I went to the miter saw and I cut that on 3 degrees, and I just want to double check that I am on 3 degrees. That looks great. So I'm going to lock that out right there. Okay, and I'll lower my blade. I'm just looking for about 1 inch. Lock that out. My jambs are approximately 5 inches. So I'm going to make my first cut at about 5.5 inches. I'll just double check the backside. I can go ahead and install the guard. Power is off. Power back on. Now when you go to rip your jambs, you want to put the straightest edge you have up against your fence. So I'm going to eyeball it up. I like that side there. If your edges aren't straight, go back to the jointer and make a pass or two to get those edges straight. Now with that edge done, I can turn it around, set the saw up at 4 3/8, and then rip the other side. The other thing I want to do, I've just created a long point on a good face. So what I'll do is I'll just take my pencil and I'll just put a squibbly line on the back so I know that is indeed the back of my jambs. That way I won't get confused. Okay, I'm ready to rip the other side of my jamb. So I've just taken a second here and I've just qualified that I do have my long point up and I get towards the fence. I'm just checking right there. The other thing I'll look for as I put that jamb up against the fence, there should be no daylight in there. It should be nice and tight. So I've set my saw up at 4 3/8 of an inch. So let's go ahead and rip them down. I've cut the two side jambs and the head jamb at 4 3/8, 3 degrees. I've identified the back. Now the next thing I need to do is get these ready for stain. So I'm going to take it back to my bench. I'm going to ease the edges, which means I'm just going to put an 1/8 inch round over, and I'm going to sand them up and make them ready for paint. All right, so let's head back to the workbench. Okay, I'm back here at the bench. I've milled down my jambs. The jambs have nice sharp edges now. Cut at 3 degrees, but the edges are fairly sharp. So what I want to do is ease up those edges. Now, if you're doing a lot of doors, you can buy a router bit that has a 1/8 round over with a bearing on it. That's what I own. So I put that in my hand router, and I just buzz my edges and create that. So for today in the shop, we don't have that. So we're going to use a block plane and a piece of sandpaper. So I'll make 3 to 4 passes with my block plane, just to kind of knock that down a little bit. And then I'll take some sandpaper to it. I could use one more pass. Now I'll just take my sandpaper. I'm going to start off with a 120, and I just have a little styrofoam block to hold that for me. I'll go ahead and ease up that edge. While I'm here with the sandpaper, I'm going to get the space at this fan too. And hit it with the 120, then maybe some 180 or 150. I'll switch up to some 150 here, just to finish it up. Get that edge again. Be able to see that. You can see that edge is just rounded up nicely. I'll go ahead and do that to my other 5 edges. Okay, so I've now rounded up all my edges. So my long point, this is my back. I identified it with the squiggly line, this is my good face. So I go ahead and cut these to length. So I have a 24-inch door. I measured the doors exactly 24 inches. I want to have a 1/16 gap on the hinge side and an 1/8 gap on the opposite side. So I'm going to cut my head jamb 24 3/16. My 2 side jambs, I want to be up 3/4 of an inch from the finished floor, plus the height of the door. So I'm now at 80 3/4, plus another 3/4 for the head jamb. I'm at 81 1/2, and plus a 1/8 gap between the door and the head jamb. So I'm going to cut my side jambs at 81 5/8. And you might remember I measured my finished floor, I leveled my finished floor, and it was only off by a 1/16, so I'm not going to adjust my jamb height for a 1/16 of an inch. Again, if it was a 1/4 3/8, then I would go ahead and adjust my jamb height. Right? So I'll go ahead and cut these to length, 81 5/8 for the sides, and 24 3/16 for the head jamb. After you've cut the head jamb to length, I double checked it. I took my tape and I double checked it. I'm definitely 24 3/16. You always want to be 3/16 bigger than your door. What's a great idea is to double check. So I'm going to take my top jamb. I'm going to lay it up flush with the top. I'm going to make it flush on the hinge side. And then I'm just going to eyeball the other side and make sure that I'm definitely hanging over 3/16 of an inch. And I can see I have that it looks pretty good. I'm going to keep that. Now, if this was a little bit too long and I go and install it, my gaps would be too big. So you've got one time to get this right. So it's very important to double check to make sure that you're exactly 3/16 bigger than your door. Again, we're going to go with a 16th gap on the hinge side and a 1/8 gap on the latch side. Another tip I'd like to give you is about doing a relief cut on the back of the jambs. Now, For the students of Mohawk College, I do not want you to make a relief cut on your pine jams because we're going to reuse these for other projects. But if you're out on the job site and you're about to put in a natural wood product jam, it's a great idea to do a relief cut. And all it is 3 cuts, one in the center, about 1 inch in from either end, about 3/16 of a deep, and that'll help prevent that jam from cupping and warping. Again, for students at Mohawk, I don't want you to do that because we're going to reuse the material. Hope that helps. Okay, it's time to start rounding out our jam for our hinges. For the Mohawk students, you made yourself a jig for doing the routering. The router we're going to use is a hand router. It has a 5/8 bearing and a 1/2 inch bit, so we have a 16th clearance all the way around it. So our jig we've set up 7 inches to the top of the hinge, 67 to the top of the bottom hinge, and 1 in the center. We came in, we want the hinge to finish up 1 1/8, so we added the 16th, so we cut it back 1 inch and 3/16. Now at the very top, we have a 7/8 notch up here by 1 3/8. The 1 3/8 is for the door, and the 7/8 taller is for the door jamb. So this is going to go flush to the top of my door jamb. Then I'll just make it flush on the side, and then I'll just get a couple of C-clamps, clamp that down, and router that out. As far as setting up the router height, I've got a scrap piece of plywood equal to my jig. I'll take my hinge, I'll just set my hinge up to the top of that, and I'll make that perfectly flush, so when I router it out, sit on top, I'll have a nice tight fit. I've got my jig clamped down to my door jamb. I'm flush at the very top. I'm 7/8 above the door. It's clamped down tight. Now if I wish to, I could put nails. I could use nails. If I come in about 2 inches and place a small, like 1.5 inch nail, I could go ahead and nail my jig down to my door jamb. I would suggest you come in at least 2 inches. When you put your door stop on, that'll cover those holes. So I've got my router set up at the right height. I used a piece of plywood and a hinge to make sure I'm at the right depth. So we'll go ahead and router up this middle one. There we go, that bearing just falls along that plywood nicely. I get a nice clean cut, and I get the correct depth. So I'll go ahead and finish off the other 2 as well. Okay. Now that we have our jamb all routed out to receive our hinges, I like to talk about the placement of the hinges. I personally like to put the 2-knuckle hinge on the jamb, and I like to put the 3-knuckle on the door. And the reason why is when I go to lift that door onto its hinges, I can put my thumb underneath the hinge to lift it on, and I don't pinch any skin between the 2 knuckles. So my personal preference is 2 on the jamb and 3 on the door. Unless they're decorative hinges. If they're expensive and decorative hinges, you might have a little steeple or a ball or something, then you have to follow what the manufacturer's done. So the other thing I like to use, these self-centering drill bits. So they sit perfectly inside that hinge, and they put the hole right at the correct spot. I'll do a quick demo. So I just center that on, give myself a little pilot bit. I don't go in very deep with softwood because I want those screws to bite. And just make sure that didn't go through the other side. Yeah, go ahead and do the other 2. Okay, I have my screws and my hinges. I'm all ready to go. I'd just like to talk about the ideal setup for the perfect door. we like to see 5 sets of shims on our hinge side, and they are 1 set of shims beside each hinge. On the bottom one, I put it above the hinge. On the top hinge, I put the shim below the hinge. 1 at the very top and 1 at the very bottom, so 5 placements altogether. So what I'm going to do, I've started using screws to hold my door jamb in place. So I'm going to put 1 screw below each set of shims. And after I've got my door in plumb, level, and square, I'll check the wind of the door. Once I like the wind of the door, then I'll go back and I'll put 2 power nails, finishing nails into each shim. But for now, I want to put a screw below the shim just so I can tighten it up and adjust it the way I see fit until I get it perfect. Once I've got it perfect, then I'll go ahead and nail it off. So on the hinge side, like I said, I'm doing 5 shims. Now on the latch side, we're going to do 5 as well. Very top, very bottom. We're going to put 2 around the latch because that's where all the action is, and then 1 in between the bigger span, between the top and the latch. If you need to, you can put another set of shims down at the bottom, but only if you need to. Okay, so let's go back to our door jamb, and we're going to go ahead and pre-drill for those screws. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and pre-drill for our screws. I'm going to use a number 8 2-inch or 2.5-inch screw. So what I have here is a 3/8 pilot bit, right? And I've laid out basically where my shims are going to go so I know where to put my screws. I want my screws to be covered by the door stop. So the door stop we're going to use is 1.25 inches. My door is 1 3/8 inches, plus I want to come another 5/8 to the center of that. So I've come in 2 inches, and once I put my door stop on that, you'll never see those screws. We'll go ahead and pilot these 5 out. That jamb is ready to go. Now you don't have to use screws. I used to use 2.5-inch finishing nails forever, but probably about 5 years ago I switched over to screws. I just find it a lot easier to adjust. If I have to pull my jamb in or out, left or right, I can back off the screw, move it, put it back. So I find the screws a lot easier. And I can tweak it just that little bit if I need it. All right, so let's go ahead and start the jamb for the latch side. Okay, for our latch jamb, it's quite a lot easier than the hinge side because we only have to do the latch. So what I've done here is I've taken my latch jamb, laid it up there. This is going to be a right-hand reverse this door, and I just put a little mark where I think the latch is going to be on the correct side, and I've marked my top as well. That way I won't get too confused. Okay, the door handle is going to be centered at 36 inches up from the bottom, so I stroke a line there. Now our door jamb, our side jamb is going to be hanging above 3/4 of an inch, plus a 1/8 gap. So it's going to be 7/8 of an inch above the door. So I'm measuring 44 inches here, plus the 7/8. So I'm 44 and 7/8 to the center of the latch. I'm going to go ahead and do that routing right now while it's on my table. 44 and 7/8. Let's get started. Okay, installing the strike plate. So the strike plate I've got out of the manufacturer's box. It measures 2 1/4, so I need to router that in. Now you remember the height? We're 44 inches from the door to the center of the latch. So I added 7/8, 3/4 for the head jamb plus an 1/8 gap. So from the top of my jamb, I came down 44 and 7/8 to the center of my latch. The strike plate is 2 1/4, so I'll go 1 1/8 inches each way of center. And that's where my strike plate goes. Now, the first thing you can do is you can just set that in there and hand chisel it out. But personally, if I can't plug it in, I don't want to use it. I like this little jig here that we picked up. These are about $20, and they're set up for 1 inch, 1 1/8 latch and strike plate, and they can also do it for 1 3/8 door and 1 3/4. Up at the very top, there's where you set your side jamb up to right here. That's for 1 3/8 door. That's 1 3/4 door. So I can set that up right here. Make it flush with that 1 3/4. I can line it up with my marks. I'm a 16th pass. I can go ahead and nail that down and then router that out. The other option, you can actually make yourself a jig. So the jig is set at the correct depth and 2 3/8. So I can clamp that jig down there like so and router that out. So let me show you how that works. I just wanted you to have a bird's eye view of how this jig looks. So right here in the center, that's my 44 7/8. Then I went 1 1/8 both sides, right? And then I drilled out a 1-inch hole using a spade bit for the center. I like to leave a little meat in the bottom of that. I don't like to drill that through. I don't want to see that jack stud when I'm all done. Now down at the end here, right here, that's where I set up my door jamb. This is for 1 3/8 door right here. This one out here, 3/16 forward, that's for 1 3/4 door. Same down at the other end. 1 3/8 right here. Sorry about that. 1 3/8, 1 3/4. You notice I tacked a nail in here and tacked a nail in here. So I'm ready to go. So I'll go ahead and set this router up now. We need to set our router up the correct depth of the strike plate. So what I'm going to do is just set the jig up on top with the strike plate. I'll just lower that down till that router bit is flush with that strike plate. Just a hair more. No. Just up a bit. Quite fussy. That looks good there. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Now I can go ahead and router that out. All right, fits great. Beautiful. Okay, the last thing I need to do for my latch jamb is to drill some pilot holes. So I've kind of laid out where my shibs are going to go, and I want my screws below the shibs. So at the top, I'm just coming down about 2.5 inches. The thing you want to mark, you want to make sure your screws are in behind your door stop. So that's 2 inches in, 1 3/8 for the door, and half the thickness of the door stop, which is 5/8. Add the 2 up, and you got 2 inches. So if I put these screws at 2 inches on center, then the door stop will hide them. So go ahead and drill them out. Finally prepared. As you notice, I do a lot of work on the bench. I like to work at 3 foot high, be comfortable, rather than down on my knees and doing all this work after the door's on. I prefer to prepare the jambs right here at a bench so it's nice and easy. All right, so let's move on to preparing the door. With our door jambs done, it's time to move on to the door. The first thing I want to do, the manufacturer has put a 3-degree bevel on both sides of the door, so I want to find where that is. I'm just going to tip the door towards me so I can see the top. Use a tri-square or frame-it square or something like that. This is going to locate the long point. I can see that it's facing down right now. I'll check the other side as well. Yeah, 3 degrees on both sides. Now, while I have the door down, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the notes from the manufacturer on the top. And sometimes they'll put a note on there on where the latch block is, and sometimes they'll put a note on where the hinges are, right? And there's nothing to that. It's just got the size 24 inches by 80 inches tall. So there's no notes. I can put the hinges on either side and the latch on either side, so we're good to go. Okay, long points facing me. Now this door, we're doing a right-hand reverse, meaning the door hinges are on the right-hand side, and it's going to swing open into the room. Okay. So I'm going to make a little note up at the top here that this is the top, so don't get confused. And then 7 inches is going to be my hinge, so I'll just draw a little picture there, what the hinge looks like. So when I put it down on the ground and start routering it, I know I'm on the right side. All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and lay that down and get started. Okay, we're about to start routering out the door for the hinges. I just want to show you the setup I have here, so I'll just do a walk by here. So I've taken the jig itself, I've made the jig flush at the very top. This is for the door, this is for the door jamb. There's 7/8 of an inch difference here. The cut back is 1 3/8. Okay, there's that mark I made earlier to identify what side the barrel of the hinge goes on, so when I lay the door down I don't get confused. Right? So I can go ahead and router that out. There's the middle one, and there's the last one. I only got 3 nails in here holding it in, right here, another nail here, and another nail here. They're 1.5 inch commons, and the heads are sticking out so I can easily get the hammer on that to pull that out. All right, so let's get the router out and get going. When you're putting the screws in these hinges, it's always a great idea to take your drill and just clutch it down a little bit. You don't want to strip out that wood too much or at all. Just kind of clutch it out. You can just finish it off with the screwdriver if you have to. If you let that screw spin and spin and spin, all you're doing is tearing that wood thread out, and then that screw has no holding power. You notice it clutched out all 3 times on me. I'd like to take a minute to just show you some different jigs that you can buy for boring out your cylinder for your latch. For about $200 you can pick up one of these here. This is made by Porta-Cable. I got this for $200, and it's basically a plastic clamp that sits down over top of your door, and then it's got a 2 1/8 Forstner bit and a 1 inch for the latch itself. It has to have a couple of markers for your strike plate and for your latch. Stepping up from there, this one here is from Westlock, Quickset, sorry, my bad. And it comes with a cast aluminum block, and it sits much better on the door. I'll just do a quick drop it down there to show you what that looks like. All right. That one there is about $300. And if you're doing a lot of doors, it's definitely worth it. So you can see it's got the Forstner bit as well as the 2 1/8 bore, and it's got all the marking gauges as well for your strike plate and for your latch. But unfortunately for you guys at Mohawk, we are just going to do it with a 2 1/8 bore and a 15/16 bit. So I'll get set up and show you how that works. Okay, so we're going to bore our hole for our latch. So it's 3 feet up off the bottom of the door. So I'll tape up 3 feet. And square that. And on the long point side, I'm going to come down 1 3/4 inch, 2 3/4 to the center of the doorknob. I'm going to go ahead and drill that out. Now you got to be really careful with the hole saw that you don't go all the way through. So once your bit gets through, you want to stop right there. Make sure you're square and true, 1 3/4 to the center. this side here now, so I'll just come around to the other side and finish that off. If I was to drill straight through, I would tear the skin off this side here. And we're done. Now for the latch itself, I prefer to use a 15/16 auger bit. I find 1 inch, the strike place itself is 1 inch, but if I'm a little bit out of center, I end up with like just a little piece missing. I'm just marking my center here. And sometimes 7/8 is too tight, so 15/16 works perfect. I'll just center that up. Again, make sure you're nice and square, plumb to the door. Beautiful. All right, now I can go ahead and router that out for my latch. All right, so we're going to go ahead and router out for our latch on the edge of our door. So I need to set up the height. So I've got my jig down below and I've got my latch here. And I will just go ahead and set up that router bit so it will be nice and straight and flush for me. And I think we're pretty good there. All right, now we go ahead and install that on the door. Okay. Okay, so 3 foot center of our latch, and then our latch is 2 1/4. So off center, I want 1 1/8 inches each way, so I can center this up properly. I can go ahead and use my guide. The guide I'm using is 1 1/8 inches, and I'm just going to center it up. I like to point out that I'm flush with the 1 3/8 mark here and at the top as well. Go ahead and tack that in. Tack the other side in. I'll just do an aerial shot of that. Let's see what I did here. You can see right here, I'm flush here. That's the 1 3/8. There's the other 1 3/8 mark there, okay? There's center of my door, and I went 1 1/8 inches each way, so it's 2 1/4 overall. Now, I could take a second and point out, there are some old hinge marks on this door. Here at Mohawk, we use the doors twice before we put them in the garbage. So this is a former student who did it. This isn't me making a mistake, that's a former student drilling out his doors. I'll go ahead and take my router that out. There we go. Because I used that jig, you can see that I got a nice, tight, beautiful fit on that latch. It's the right height and it fits really well. Okay, this door is almost ready to install. There's one last thing we need to do. We just want to sand up our edges and make that nice and smooth. A lot of times from the manufacturer, once they put the primer on it, the edges are quite rough. So I like to give it a quick little sand. I'm talking this edge here. Just needs a quick little pass. Just smooth out those edges. The other thing I like to do is just kind of break the edges on the side a wee bit too. I'm just using 150 to 180 with a little sanding disc. The other thing I like to do on the very bottom and the top, I just like to break that edge as well. Quick little sand. I'll flip this door over and do the other side. All right, after that, we're ready to get installed. Okay, it's time to start installing our frame. I've got my gun set up. I'm going to put 3 2.5 inch 16 gauge nails in the top. I like nails because if I have to tweak the head jamb a little bit, the nails are forgiving. If I was to use screws, it would probably crack either the side jamb or the head jamb. I'll make sure it's flush on both sides, flush on the top. And flip that over. Make sure my two tops line up. Check that. Yeah. Just confirming that bottom one is popping right in. And flush on the two sides, flush on the end. Beautiful. One nail that. Okay, now I'm ready to go ahead and set that in. I've got a good fit. Grab myself some wedges. I'm going to start at the very top. I'm looking for 4 shims. Just start right up here at the very top. And what I want to do is pinch that head jam between the two side jams. And I want to center it in the opening at the very top. I want to center the door frame in the rough stud opening. So I've got roughly 3/8 on both sides. Next thing I need to do, I need to make sure at the top, you'll remember we cut our door jamb 1/8 wider than our opening. So I want to hang over a 1/16 each side. So I'll just go ahead and center that up and make sure that the long point of the jamb is sticking past the wall by a 1/16. I'll go ahead and put a screw in that. I want my screw not to hit the wedges, just to be a little bit below the shim. I'll clutch that out a little bit, tighten that up a bit. Okay, but now I can introduce a 6-foot level, and I'm going to level from the very top. I'm going to level down to this hinge right here. I'm going to place these shims just slightly above my nail, my screw, I'm sorry. I'll make sure I'm hanging in 1/16 of an inch. That looks good there. I'll check that for plumb. So I'm plumbing from this shim here to just above the hinge. Yeah, it looks pretty darn good. Looks pretty darn good. So I'm going to put another set of shims here in the center. Now I'm going to totally work on the hinge side. I'm going to get this perfectly true and perfectly plumb. Then I'm going to introduce my door. Now I'm going to use my 6-foot level as a straight edge. Make sure that I'm plumb from the top shim to the hinge at the bottom hinge, the shim there, making sure I'm straight. That's looking pretty good. I quite like that. I think with that there, I'm going to go ahead and put the third set of shims in. I'm sorry, the fourth. I'll just snug that up. Yeah, that's looking great. So I'd like to point out that these screws are not through any of the shims. So if I have to come back and adjust this side for the wind, I can. So I'm gonna go get the door and introduce the door. Okay, I have my door here now. Just to recap, all I've done is the hinge jam only. I've plumbed it, I've got 4 screws and 4 sets of shims in that. Now I'm gonna introduce my door. I'm gonna use my door as a straight edge. So let's get these pins in. With the pins in, I want to work on that gap on that side. Just bring you a little closer to show you what I'm looking at. Okay, see that gap there at the hinge? I want to create the same gap at the top, and I want to create the same gap all the way down right to the bottom. You can see the bottom's got to come in a little bit, but other than that, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to make this side perfect, and then I'll work on the top next. Okay, we've got the hinge side finished. I've got 5 sets of shims in there. I don't have any nails in the shims. They're sitting on the screws I put in. I've got a nice 8 gap here at the top and all the way down. Now what I try to create here is a 1/8 gap here, and I had to adjust it a little bit. It's a good thing I had nails in there, so I was able to pull it down just a little bit. Now what I'll do is I'll take a shim as a guide. I'll just put the shim in there, and then I can mark where that sits on the door. Then I can pull that shim over to this side, and that gives me the exact gap that I need across the top. I can go ahead and open that up and put a screw on that. Okay, I'm standing in front of the door, and I've created a nice 8th gap across the top. Now, this gap here at the very top, this is on the latch side. I have a nice 8th gap between the jamb and the door. What I'm going to do is going to shim this side here, putting those last 4 shims in, and I'm going to try to keep that 8th gap all the way. I'll just start at the top and do 1 shim at a time, maintaining that 8th gap all the way down. I'll put 1 screw in it, no nails, not until after I check the wind of the door. I've got the latch side all shimmed up now. I got the gap pretty good. I got a screw below each shim. I haven't nailed anything yet. I got to check the wind of the door. We're going to do that now. Hopefully this will show up on the back side of the door. And what I'm looking for is a gap between the door and the jamb on the latch side. You can see I got an 8th gap down there. Just following it down, I got a nice gap all the way. Looks pretty good. I'll take you over to the other side and show the outside as well. See up the top there, I got a nice 8 gap all the way. Now if that was off, I'd have to fix it. So I would start with the latch side, and whatever side had to come out, I'd pull that out a little bit, and whatever side had to go in, I'd put that in a little bit. And if I had to, I'd go to the hinge side and do it as well. Now that I've checked the wind of the door and that both jambs line up with each other, I can go ahead and nail off all the cedar shims. So I'm going to put 2 2.5 inch nails into each cedar shim. I can go ahead and cut the cedar shims off. Okay, so we've pretty much completed this door except for the door stop and the casing, which are both pretty simple to do. To install your casing, I want you to set in 1/8. I want to see a 1/8 reveal. Make sure you use glue on your miter. Make sure you use 2 nails, one into the jamb, one into the wall, about every 16 inches, okay? Now for your door stop, the door stop, you're gonna put 3 pieces on, the latch side, the hinge side, and the top. For a gap, the one on the hinge side does nothing. It's strictly cosmetic. So make sure from the back of the door to the door stop, you leave a 1/8 gap. On the latch side, leave a 1/16 gap. And the reason for that is for paint. There's going to be 3 coats of paint going on the door stop, 3 coats of paint putting on the door. You need room for that paint. So stay a 1/16 away and an 1/8 on this side. The length of your door stop from long point to long point is the height of the door, 80 3/8, plus the door stop is usually 3/8 of an inch thick, plus an 1/8 gap. If you cut it 80 1/2, long point to long point for your 2 sides, you'll be right on. That's from long to long. And I'm okay with a miter at the top. All right, so that's how you install your door stop, casing I already talked about. The handle, since everything's been pre-drilled already, you're ready to put on your latch, you're ready to put on your doorknob, and you're ready to put on your strike plate. And that will complete it. Thank you very much for watching.